We are glad to welcome you to the Lucas History Channel. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more stories like this. Enjoy your viewing. The streetlights blurred as I drove, Beth sitting rigidly beside me in the car. Silence filled the space between us, but it was not the comfortable kind. Her arms were crossed, her jaw set, anger radiating off her like heat from a fire. I replayed the evening in my mind, trying to make sense of how we'd ended up here. Lisa and Joe Parker had invited us to their party, a festive gathering full of laughter, music, and clinking glasses. It seemed innocent enough at first. I hadn't suspected anything unusual, until the bowl came out. Beth had known. She must have. Yet, she hadn't said a word. Not when we received the invitation, not on the drive over, not even as the Parkers announced the game. It wasn't until couples began dropping their keys into the bowl that I realized the true nature of the evening. The kind of party this was. A key party. When I confronted her in the kitchen, her nonchalance stunned me. "Yes, I knew," she said when I asked if she'd been aware of the plan. She smiled as if we were discussing the weather. "And you thought I'd be fine with this?" My voice trembled, disbelief mingling with fury. "No, Mark," she replied, her tone maddeningly calm. "That's why I didn't tell you." Her words felt like a slap. "Beth, I can't believe you'd even consider something like this. We're married." "It's just one night," she said, brushing it off as if it were a casual dinner date. "It doesn't mean anything." But it did. To me, it meant everything. We left the party in a rush, my hand gripping her arm as I pulled her toward the door. She protested, embarrassed by the scene I'd caused, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to stand there while she humiliated me, and herself. Now, as we neared home, her icy demeanor broke through the fog of my anger. "You had no right to do that," she said finally, her voice sharp. "I'm an adult. I can make my own choices." "Not when those choices involve throwing away everything we've built," I retorted. Her laugh was bitter. "Built? Mark, we're stagnant. I needed something. Just one night to feel alive again." "You think betrayal will make you feel alive?" I asked, incredulous. "I think honesty would help," she shot back. "At least I'm honest about what I need." The words hung in the air, a twisted echo of the woman I thought I knew. This wasn't just about the party anymore, it was about something deeper, something I hadn't seen coming. We pulled into the driveway. I turned off the engine but didn't move. "Beth," I said quietly, "if you want something different, tell me now. If you want out, just say it." She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the car door and stepped out into the night, leaving me to sit there alone, my hands gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping me grounded. Beth slammed the front door as she entered the house, the sound echoing through the quiet neighborhood. I followed slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. She was in the kitchen by the time I stepped inside, pouring herself a glass of wine with trembling hands. "Beth, we need to talk," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "There's nothing to talk about," she snapped, though her voice cracked slightly. "You've made it clear how you feel." "And you haven't." I countered. "You wanted to, what? Teach me a lesson? Reignite a spark by sleeping with someone else?" Her shoulders stiffened. "I didn't plan for it to happen this way." "What way, exactly?" I pressed. "Because from where I'm standing, you've planned this perfectly. Did you think I wouldn't notice? That I'd just laugh it off and wait for you to come back?" Beth turned to face me, her eyes glistening with frustration and something else I couldn't quite place. "You don't understand, Mark. I've spent the last 10 years being the perfect wife, the perfect mom. I'm drowning in it. This was supposed to be liberating." "Liberating?" I said, the word sour in my mouth. "From what?" "Your family. Your life. Me." Her silence was deafening. I took a step closer. What happened to us, Beth? I've done everything I could to make you happy. You're saying that wasn't enough? It's not about you, she whispered, looking away. It's about me. I've lost myself, Mark. Somewhere between the PTA meetings and bedtime stories, I stopped being me. So your solution is to destroy the one stable thing you had left? I asked, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. Beth, we could have worked through this. Together. Her laugh was hollow. Together? When's the last time you even looked at me like I was more than a checklist item? I needed to feel wanted. I want you, Beth, I said, my voice low. I've always wanted you. But I guess that wasn't enough. The wine glass clinked softly as she set it down on the counter. I'm sorry you feel that way. I couldn't believe my ears. Sorry I feel that way. Beth, you. A sudden thought hit me like a freight train, stopping my words in their tracks. Wait. Did you already plan to go through with this before tonight? Her eyes widened, the flicker of guilt unmistakable. That was all the confirmation I needed. My stomach twisted as the realization settled in. She hadn't just been caught up in the moment at the party. This wasn't a spontaneous decision, it was premeditated. Beth, I said slowly, tell me the truth. Have you already crossed the line? Her face went pale. What are you saying? You know exactly what I'm saying. Was this the first time you've done something like this? Or just the first time you've been caught? Her hesitation spoke louder than any words could. I stepped back, a wave of nausea rolling over me. I need some air. Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked out of the house. The night was cool, but the chill did little to quell the storm raging inside me. I leaned against the car, staring up at the sky as if the stars held the answers I desperately sought. This wasn't the woman I'd married. At least, I didn't think it was. But then again, maybe I'd been blind to the signs all along. I don't know how long I stood outside, but the sound of the door creaking open behind me pulled me back to reality. Beth stepped out, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill. She didn't say anything at first, just hovered there, her silhouette framed by the warm glow of the house. Mark, she said finally, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Can we please just talk? I turned to face her, my chest tightening at the sight of her tear-streaked face. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to pull her into my arms and tell her we'd figure it out. But the weight of her betrayal was too much to ignore. Talk about what? I asked, my tone colder than I intended. What's left to say? I don't know, she admitted. I don't want us to end like this. Then why did you put us here? I asked, my voice cracking despite myself. Beth, you didn't just break my trust, you shattered it. How am I supposed to look at you the same way again? Her eyes welled up, and she took a step closer. Because you love me, she said simply, as though that was the answer to everything. I do love you, I said, the admission cutting deeper than I expected. But love isn't a free pass for betrayal. It doesn't mean you get to treat me, our marriage, like it's disposable. She wiped at her eyes, her breathing uneven. It wasn't like that, Mark. It was just. I don't even know how to explain it. Try, I challenged, crossing my arms. Because right now, all I see is a woman who threw away 10 years of marriage for a cheap thrill. Her gaze dropped to the ground. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of crickets. Then she whispered, I didn't sleep with anyone. Not yet. The breath I'd been holding escaped in a rush, but her words didn't bring the relief I'd hoped for. Not yet, I repeated bitterly. So you wanted to. That's supposed to make this better. She flinched, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. I was confused. I still am. But I didn't go through with it. Doesn't that mean something? It means you hesitated, I said. But it doesn't erase the fact that you were willing to try. Her head snapped up, anger flashing in her eyes. You act like this is all on me, Mark. Like I'm the only one who's been unhappy. Don't, I warned, my voice low. Don't turn this around on me. If you were unhappy, you should have said something. We could have worked on it together. Instead, you decided to throw yourself into someone else's arms. Do you even realize what you've done? Her lip quivered, but she didn't respond. She didn't have to. The silence said it all. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. You don't, do you? You've been so focused on yourself, on what you think you've been missing, that you never stop to think about how this would affect me. Or the kids. Her face crumpled at the mention of our children. I never wanted to hurt them. But you did, I said firmly. Because now, no matter what happens next, they're going to grow up in a broken home. Her breath hitched, and she took another step toward me, reaching out as if to touch my arm. Mark, please. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I stepped back, out of her reach. It's not that simple, Beth. I don't know if this is something we can come back from. Her hand fell to her side, and for the first time that night, she looked genuinely defeated. So that's it, then. You're just, giving up. I stared at her, my heart twisting painfully in my chest. You gave up first. With that, I turned and walked down the driveway, leaving her standing there under the dim porch light, tears streaming down her face. I walked aimlessly down the street, each step pounding with the weight of everything I'd just heard. The night air was cool, but it couldn't chase away the fire burning in my chest. I couldn't go far, I didn't want to leave the kids unattended for too long, even though they were asleep upstairs. But I couldn't stay in that house either, not with her in it. Beth. The woman I had built my life around, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. And now, the woman who had just admitted she'd been willing to throw it all away for a fleeting thrill. Her face was etched into my mind, tear-streaked, desperate, yet somehow still defiant. I found myself at the park, sitting heavily on one of the wooden benches near the playground. The swings creaked gently in the breeze, a sound that should have been comforting but wasn't. I tried to steady my breathing, to think clearly, but my thoughts were a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. Her words echoed in my head, I just wanted to feel alive again. Alive? Hadn't we been happy? Hadn't I shown her how much I loved her? Weekly date nights, spontaneous flowers, love notes tucked into her purse. I thought we were solid. Sure, things had changed after the kids came along, how could they not? But I never imagined she'd been secretly harboring this void. And then, her admission, she hadn't gone through with it. Not yet. The truth was, that didn't change much. She had wanted to. She had walked right up to the edge of betrayal and stood there, willing herself to jump. Even if she hadn't taken the final step, how was I supposed to ignore the fact that she'd considered it at all? I leaned forward, burying my face in my hands. This wasn't just about me. This was about our kids. Natalie, Emma, and little Mark Jr., the three people who would bear the weight of whatever decision I made next. How could I tell them that their mother had almost destroyed our family? How could I look them in the eyes and pretend everything was okay when it so clearly wasn't? I stayed at the park for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. Eventually, I made my way back to the house. The lights in the living room were still on, and through the window, I could see Beth pacing back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was muffled, but the urgency in her tone was unmistakable. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. A part of me wanted to walk in there and demand answers. Another part of me wanted to turn around and keep walking, to leave her to deal with the mess she'd made. In the end, I stepped inside. Beth was startled when she saw me, quickly ending her call. Mark, she began, but I held up a hand. Not now, I said, my voice flat. I'm not ready to hear whatever excuse you've come up with. Her face fell, but she didn't argue. Instead, she stood there, watching me as I headed upstairs. I didn't stop until I was in our bedroom, the door closed firmly behind me. The bed was neatly made, the way she always kept it. On the nightstand was a picture of the two of us from our wedding day, young, happy, blissfully unaware of the storms that lay ahead. I picked up the frame and stared at it, my fingers tracing the glass. How had we gotten here? My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking my train of thought. I pulled it out and saw a text from Beth, "I'm sorry." 2 words. As if they could undo everything. I didn't respond. Instead, I placed the phone on the nightstand and climbed into bed, fully clothed. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing there at that party, her face flushed with excitement as she tossed her key into the bowl. I saw her walking upstairs with some faceless man, her laughter ringing in my ears. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were restless and chaotic. I woke before dawn, the early light filtering through the curtains. Beth wasn't in bed. I wasn't surprised. Downstairs, I found her on the couch, curled up under a blanket. She was awake, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up as I entered the room but didn't say anything. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say myself. Finally, I broke the silence. "We need to figure out what happens next." She nodded slowly, sitting up. "I know. I'm not ready to make any decisions right now," I continued. "But I'll say this, things can't go back to the way they were. Not after this." Her lips trembled, but she nodded again. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mark. I swear." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and walked into the kitchen, needing space to think. The coffee maker hummed softly as I stared out the kitchen window, watching the pale light of dawn creep across the backyard. The swing set swayed gently in the breeze, reminder of quieter mornings when the kids would tumble out the door, their laughter filling the air. I gripped the edge of the counter, the weight of last night pressing down on me like a leaden cloak. Beth appeared in the doorway, her blanket wrapped around her shoulders like armor. She looked small, fragile, almost unrecognizable from the fiery, confident woman I had married. For a moment, I thought about the Beth I used to know, the one who laughed with abandon, who could turn even the most mundane moments into something extraordinary. And yet, here we were, staring across a chasm she had created. "Do you want coffee?" I asked, my voice flat. She hesitated, as if unsure whether she was allowed such a small kindness. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, please." I poured her a cup, sliding it across the counter without a word. She took it in both hands, her fingers trembling slightly. We stood there in silence, the quiet stretching out between us like a taut wire, ready to snap. "I was wrong," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness coat my tongue. When I finally spoke, my words came out harsher than I intended. "Which part, Beth? Lying to me? Throwing our marriage under the bus? Or was it the part where you decided your feelings were more important than everything we've built?" She flinched, her eyes welling up again. "All of it," she said softly. I don't know what I was thinking. I felt so lost. Lost? I repeated, shaking my head. "Beth, you weren't lost. You were selfish. You didn't just risk our marriage, you risked everything. Our family. Our kids. Did you even think about them before you decided to go along with that insanity?" Her face crumpled, and she set the coffee cup down with shaking hands. "I wasn't thinking," she admitted, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was stupid, and selfish, Anne." "And what?" I snapped. You thought this would make you feel better? That it would magically fix whatever's been bothering you? Her sobs broke through then, deep and guttural, the kind of crying that came from a place too raw to hide. I didn't know how to tell you, she choked out. I didn't know how to say that I've been feeling invisible. Like I don't matter anymore. You matter, Beth, I said, my voice hard. You matter to me, to the kids. But you don't get to use that as an excuse to betray us. She nodded, her tears falling faster now. I know, she whispered. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know that I didn't. I didn't go through with it. I couldn't. Because when it came down to it, I couldn't imagine losing you. Her words struck a chord I wasn't ready to acknowledge. I turned away, staring out the window again. I don't know if I can believe you, Beth. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I'll prove it to you, she said quickly, desperation lacing her voice. I'll do whatever it takes, Mark. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right. I sighed, the weight of her words settling heavily on my shoulders. It's not that simple, I said quietly. You can't just wave a magic wand and fix this. Trust doesn't come back overnight. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. But it can come back, right? Please, Mark. Tell me there's a chance. I closed my eyes, the image of our kids flashing through my mind. Natalie's bright smile, Emma's infectious giggle, Mark Jr.'s curious eyes. They didn't deserve this. None of us did. But could I really walk away from it all? Could I truly rebuild my life without her? I don't know, I said finally, my voice barely audible. I need time. Beth nodded, her tears still flowing. Take all the time you need, she said. I'll wait. As long as it takes. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked past her, out of the kitchen, and up the stairs to check on the kids. They were still asleep, their small faces peaceful and untouched by the storm brewing around them. For their sake, I had to figure out a way forward. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure what that way would be. The next few days passed in a haze. I stayed at a motel not far from town, telling the kids I was working late on a project. My mother, bless her, helped keep them distracted, taking them to the park and organizing sleepovers with their cousins. Beth called me every night, but I rarely answered. When I did, our conversations were brief and stilted, her voice filled with pleading and apologies that I wasn't ready to hear. By the end of the week, I knew I had to face her. I couldn't avoid it forever, not with the kids in the middle. So, on Friday evening, I drove back to the house. The sight of it, our house, the home we'd built together, filled me with a mix of longing and dread. Beth was waiting for me in the living room, her posture tense as I stepped inside. The air between us was heavy, the weight of everything unspoken hanging like a storm cloud. Mark, she began, standing as I entered. I held up a hand, stopping her. Before you say anything, I need you to listen. She nodded, her eyes wide and filled with a desperate hope. I've spent the past week trying to make sense of this, I said, my voice steady but firm. Trying to understand how we got here, and whether there's anything left to salvage. And the truth is, I don't know. Her face fell, but she didn't interrupt. What you did, Beth, what you almost did, wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. A choice to prioritize your own feelings over our marriage, over our family. And that's not something I can just forget. I know, she whispered, her voice trembling. I know I hurt you. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me. I shook my head. It's not about making it up to me. It's about trust. About whether I can ever look at you and not wonder if you'll make the same choice again. Tears streamed down her face as she stepped closer. I won't, Mark. I swear to you, I won't. I made a horrible mistake, but I learned from it. I can't lose you, I can't lose us. Her words tugged at something deep inside me, but I held my ground. It's not just about us, Beth. It's about the kids. They deserve stability, not parents who are pretending everything is okay when it's not. What are you saying? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I'm saying we need time apart, I said, the words cutting like a knife even as I spoke them. Not just for me, but for you too. You need to figure out what you really want, and I need to decide if I can ever trust you again. Her shoulders sagged as the weight of my words sank in. Does this mean, it's over? I don't know, I admitted honestly. But I do know that we can't keep going like this. She nodded slowly, her expression a mixture of sorrow and resignation. What about the kids? We'll share custody for now, I said. They'll stay here with you during the week, and I'll take them on weekends. I'll move into a place nearby so I can still be there for them. Mark, she said, her voice breaking. I know I don't deserve it, but, please don't give up on us. I didn't have an answer for her. Instead, I turned and headed upstairs to pack a bag. The kids were playing in their rooms, oblivious to the turmoil unfolding around them. I kissed each of them goodnight, my heart breaking as they hugged me tightly, their little arms reminding me of what was truly at stake. As I left the house that night, the weight of the decision settled over me. This wasn't the ending I'd envisioned when I stood at the altar with Beth all those years ago. But maybe it wasn't an ending at all, just a pause, a chance to reevaluate and rebuild, whether together or apart. Time would tell. Thank you for watching to the end. Write in the comments what you liked and what you would like to see next.